You're driving through the city, enjoying the sights, when suddenly, you see it. A unique icon that could mean a whole plethora of things. A Speedo Custom, Ruiner 2000, a Rhino tank, a Deluxo, or even the dreaded Compressor Mark II. You dart into an alleyway for protection, checking your ammo and snacks, and you prepare for a gunfight. And then, a Winky huts around the corner. Why does such an unthreatening vehicle have such a unique icon, while other much more daunting vehicles like the weaponized Ignis, Vigilante, or even the Toreador just appear as normal dots? Well, maybe that isn't a question we can answer, but we can answer this. Which unique radar icon is the best, and how do the other 105 rank in comparison? Perhaps I've even managed to uncover some of the secret icons that Rockstar have tried to hide, like the aforementioned Toreador's icon. Starting with what could arguably be one of the worst radar icons in the entire game, we take a quick look at the Insurgent. Now sure, the Insurgent here might not have the worst design of icon. However, the regular Insurgent does not have a machine gun on top. Therefore, the icon is already incorrect. This icon also scored very poorly because it's shared on 4 different vehicles, including the Insurgent Pickup and Insurgent Pickup Custom, as well as on the Technical Custom, which is a completely different vehicle in and of itself. On a similar stance, the Hydra has a very basic jet icon, and therefore lacks in creativity, especially since it was released after the Laser, which shares the exact same icon as well. But at least with the Laser, it was a little bit more accurate. A similar story can be seen for the Inductor and Junk Energy Inductor. Though with these simply being bikes, it doesn't really matter which one you think is behind you, as they're also very unthreatening vehicles. The Alpha Z1 is one of our first unique icons of the day, and mostly scored low due to the fact that its icon is not extremely accurate to the plane. And even for the parts that it is, it's so minor that it makes it hard to identify on the small minimap within the game. Having already been mentioned once in this video, the Winky does not need a radar icon. And although it's fairly accurate in the grand scheme of things, there's just no reason for this unweaponized, unthreatening vehicle to even have a unique icon. The Howard NX-25 falls victim to the same fate as the Alpha Z1, but with the wings being slightly more forward angled, it does make it stand out just a fraction more. The Bale Enforcement Burrito likely only has a unique icon due to the fact that it doesn't really count as a personal vehicle, and therefore needed something to identify it separately on the map. The Squatty shows a bit more accuracy compared to the previous land vehicles mentioned. However, the only threatening part of this vehicle is potentially the crew of people that could be sitting in the back ready to jump you. The Dinghy is one of the only boats in the game to have a unique radar icon, likely because it's actually weaponized, which helped boost its score. However, the only other boat to have a unique icon is the Kurtz 31 patrol boat. Unfortunately for both these boats, they share the exact same design, which is slightly more accurate for the patrol boat than the Dinghy, bumping the patrol boat into 92nd place. The Rocket Voltic may not be weaponized, but being a unique vehicle, especially upon its release, it's not overly surprising that it has a unique icon. As for the Turd Limo, there's actually 2 designs. The first is a fantastic design that clearly indicates the nature of the car. However, if you call the same vehicle via Pegasus, it gets the same bloody design as the Insurgents. The new Duster 300H is another bog standard plane icon that's very hard to distinguish from other planes. But it does have the option for weapons, which makes the icon slightly more necessary than other planes on the list. The Rogue basically follows the same logic, but since it has explosive rounds, it's definitely more needed than the Duster. The Varus only scored this high due to the fact that its icon is fairly unique, being one of the only quads to stand on the minimap. Then again, it's extremely unnecessary given the vehicle's non-threatening aura. The Bombushka, however, does have a very threatening aura, but isn't overly dangerous given the fact that it kinda just sucks overall. The Speedo Custom's icon is fairly accurate, unless the player chooses to not have a mounted minigun on top, which could make it very misleading and make the icon more scary than it has to be. The Tula is another bog standard aircraft icon, but shows hints of further detail, which is promising for the rest of the list. The Ruiner 2000 is similar to the Rocket Voltic, having only been released in the early days of the game. It would make sense for a unique vehicle to have a unique icon, and given the fact that it is weaponized, I believe it's a good choice. The Menacer will likely come as a surprise in 82nd place, as it shows heavy resemblance to the fucking Insurgents. This radar icon shows decent resemblance to its appropriate vehicle. However, if I didn't tell you what it was, would you know that it's the weaponized Tampa? And then we have the Mogul, which is fairly unique, especially with the detail on the tail of the plane. Similar to the Menacer, the Technical Aqua is very similar to the Insurgents and regular Technical. However, the addition of barrels and engine on the back of the icon make it extremely clear that this is the aquatic version of those vehicles. The ramp buggy may not be weaponized, but given its destructive nature when cruising down a busy road, I didn't dock any points for its level of necessity, as it's fair that someone may want a warning if this was coming up behind them. The Rhino tank was one of the most feared places on the map in the early days of GTA Online, and if you saw this icon, it was definitely an area that you'd steer clear of. And if it weren't for some newer tanks in the game that had similar designs, this likely would have scored a lot higher. Sadly, my favorite P45 Nakota only managed to score 76th place, but this is likely due to the fact that none of the plane icons in the game are overly unique. That being said, the LF22 Starling does stand out among the rest with its stockier design and short tail, making the icon itself much more unique and identifiable. The Alkanos continues this trend of unique aircraft icons, again having a very unique shape and design, which is reflected accurately in the icon, and is often referred to as the Dorito of the skies, though I think there are two other icons that could easily dethrone this title. Speaking of tanks in the game, we can circle back to the Kanjali, which is a slightly more refined icon compared to the Rhino, but again isn't overly unique or feared as much these days. Now if you like these ranking videos, I want to quickly remind you that once we hit 50,000 subs, I'll be ranking every single road in GTA 5. To save on time, let's quickly rapid fire through the next 20 icons by describing them using only a few words. The Armored Boxville is fairly boring and basic. The Sea Breeze is accurate, but still basic. The Stromberg is a slightly better Ruiner 2000. The APC is just a more refined insurgent icon. The Brigade 6x6 does put a smile on my face. The Wastelander shows promising signs of detail, but lacks necessity, while the Havoc is basically just an egg with a propeller hat. The Pyro is one of the more unique jet icons, boosting its score. The Granger 3600 LX might have machine guns, but again isn't entirely necessary. The Jubilee just said ditto, but in a fancier font. The Vatir's only threat is a truckload of players and a lack of weaponry. The Pounder Custom is just a target on your back for sale missions. The Mule Custom, however, is the exact same thing, but it's seen less and is therefore more unique. The Kara Kara is what the technical custom wishes it could be, and the Raiju is what the last generation jets dream to identify as. The Sparrow's icon just reminds me of this stance. Tell me I'm wrong. The Phantom Wedge is a more threatening version of the ramp car, though I just picture this as a large bird. The Deity's only scary feature is those beady little headlights on its icon. Stop looking at me like that. The Everon surprisingly has a unique icon, but it's only visible within the Diamond Casino heist. Similarly, the Vagrant also follows that same rule set, but has a more unique design. The Champion, however, looks very angry, and it looks like he's about to whoop your ass for something that you didn't do. The RCV is a more defined armored boxfill, though the water turret on top is a little misleading. As previously mentioned, the Toreador doesn't stand out on the map at all. Regardless, it actually has an unused icon hidden within the game files, which is fairly accurate. The Titan 250D definitely resembles an AC-130, even in its icon. Meanwhile, the half-track definitely would have been more fitting if the icon was based on the side profile rather than its front-facing angle. Speaking of, a vast number of vehicles feature a front-facing design, with 50% of these vehicles boasting this style of icon, while 41 of the vehicles have unique icons with top-down designs, including every single plane on the list. The side profile is much less common, only being seen on 11 vehicles, while there is one vehicle with an icon that doesn't actually depict any angle of the vehicle it represents, but we'll get to that later. The Avisa has a fairly unique design, but again lacks any weapons or reason to have a unique icon. The Blazer Aqua is the only other quad to have a unique design and is slightly more recognizable than the Varus. The Terabyte is a powerhouse, but again basically only has a unique icon as a target placeholder in a public lobby. The Outlaw falls victim to the Diamond Casino heist requirement, which hides this icon from many players' knowledge. The Kasatka's icon is extremely recognizable, and although it may not be overly detailed, it is a welcome addition to this section of the list. The Deluxo may not be the most detailed, but it definitely is a necessity given its lethal nature. The Aku's icon might not be seen very much as it does have stealth capabilities, but it's important to note that this icon is fairly detailed and necessary for the vehicle. What isn't necessary, however, is the icon for the Vito Classic. The icon itself is extremely detailed for a vehicle that has absolutely zero threats on it. The Dune FAV is unsymmetrical, which is fairly uncommon for a radar icon, making it a little bit more unique. The Blimp is extremely recognizable, even if it does lack detail, as its shape is definitely one of a kind.
Davey, how you doing?
The Patriot mil-specs icon might look aggressive, and the vehicle itself might look threatening. However, only offering mounted machine guns, it might not require an icon to some. The Annihilator stealth is extremely similar to the Akula, but with a more detailed design, giving it an extra edge. The Buffalo STX is very recognizable with its front-facing design, while the Invade and Persuade tanks icon might be even more recognizable and more unique as it's not seen as often. Almost the greatest Dorito-shaped icon obviously belongs to the Volatile, but taking the crown for the Dorito-shaped icon is definitely the Ultralight. Similar to the Akula and Annihilator stealth, the Ultralight does have the ability to appear off the radar, and is the only weaponized vehicle with that feature, meaning it definitely needs this radar icon. It's also interesting to note that as a glider, it does glide for a very long... well, there it goes. The Sea Sparrow is definitely more refined than its regular Sparrow counterpart, with more details on its icon. The Molotov is one of the most identifiable radar icons in the sky. Having its swept back wings and cut off nose, it's definitely unique. Circling back to the second go-kart in the game, the Vito Modern has an even more detailed design than its classic counterpart, but again doesn't really require such effort to be shown on the map. It's honestly hard to tell if the Thruster's icon is based on a front-facing design or a rear-facing design, which could make it even more unique. Every Arena War vehicle has its own icon, and the Brutus is probably the most boring of them all. The new DH7 Iron Mule has a very detailed icon, but I think it could have benefited from having a little hook hanging from the bottom of it, as it would have made it even more unique and more identifiable. The Mirage's icon is fairly detailed, but again, you don't see this very often as the vehicle itself is kinda dog shit. The Arena War ZR380 looks even more angry than the Champion, but is fairly lackluster for the Arena War vehicle icons. Sneaking into 23rd amongst the Arena War vehicles is the Zaba, which may not require an icon all the time, but luckily this icon is only available within the Diamond Casino heist. The Impaler has a much sharper icon design that highly accentuates its grille. The Arena War Dominator is the first on this list to feature the Telltale Arena War spikes, but it is fairly hard to identify that this is a Dominator, knocking it down a few places. The Bruiser, however, is much more identifiable and still features the iconic spikes. The RC Bandito has a nice subtle, yet still detailed icon, but its design only matches the base model and not the different models you can get on this car. The Oppressor was one of the earliest vehicles to absolutely require a unique icon, but you just don't see it as much nowadays. Sticking to the theme of bikes, we have the Arena Death Bike, placing 17th overall with its design more resembling of a child's big wheel than a death bike. The Oppressor Mark II is arguably one of the scariest and most anxiety-inducing radar icons in the game. Being fairly unique and detailed, this iconic blip on the map sends most players into a slight frenzy every single time they see it. The Arena Slam Van might not be as scary, but features a much more detailed design. The Scramjet is on the opposite end of the spectrum, lacking a lot of detail, but is also extremely recognizable. Although it's fair to assume that whenever this icon happens to disappear from your map, it's not that they've called Lester to appear off their radar, but rather that their cars probably decided to go for a little swim. The Arena War Imperator is definitely harder to find in a public lobby, but does boast a fairly accurate and unique depiction of the vehicle. The Scarab's icon is somehow both very detailed and very basic at the same time. As mentioned before, there is one vehicle in the game whose radar icon doesn't actually represent the vehicle design itself, but rather is just a symbol on the map. That being the MOC, which has a satellite design rather than a detailed design of the trailer itself. The Avenger has another very unique and recognizable design, and depending on where you are on the map, could be fairly terrifying. Taking 9th, 8th, and 7th place respectively are 3 more Arena War vehicles that basically all tied for their placement. They include the Cerberus, the Arena War Issy, and the Sasquatch, which all have good uniqueness and detail. The Chernobog confuses a lot of people, as many forget the fact that it also has a very unique and specific icon, which makes it very clear on the minimap, though its design is slightly misleading as the missiles are kind of misaligned. In 5th place we have the Anti-Aircraft Trailer, which has a fairly simple yet very accurate design, and is somehow only slightly terrifying to those in the air, and not anyone on the ground. The Festival Bus might come as a surprise in 4th, as it isn't weaponized and doesn't necessarily require an icon. But given its highly detailed and unique design, and the fact that it's definitely recognizable, just bumped it up enough to claim a podium spot. In 2nd place we have the FH-1 Hunter, whose icon's design could be described as scary in and of itself, highly resembling its in-game and real-life counterpart, and is definitely one of my favorite icons. It's also interesting to note that this icon is used in one of the new Guzman file missions to represent the weaponized Kanata, which I thought was interesting. Hey, so this is me correcting a mistake that Kyle pointed out upon editing this video. Upon some further research, the weaponized Kanata does have its own design, which is fairly similar to the Hunter, so apologies for the mistake and consider them tied for 2nd place. Which means it's time for the #1 radar icon in the entire game, which again is fairly unique and is very representatious of its in-game and real-life counterpart. Arguably being more terrifying in real life, the B-11 Strike Force is another very recognizable plane on our mini-maps. That being said, sometimes it's the vehicles that you don't see coming that pose a real threat.